The sun was sliding low over the rooftops when I rinsed the last bit of soap from my car. The water shimmered gold in the Texas light, warm and quiet, the kind of calm that makes you believe life might finally stay still. I was barefoot on the driveway, sleeves rolled up, thinking only about dinner and the comfort of silence when my phone buzzed. Mom's name filled the screen. I hesitated before answering. Her voice always meant trouble wrapped in sweetness. When I picked up, her face appeared neat hair, soft smile, the same performance she'd perfected over decades. "Evie, sweetheart," she said in that tone she used when she wanted something. "Your brother's in a little trouble again. The bank wants payment on his business loan. $1 million. You'll help, right?" The water dripped from my fingers. 1 million, I repeated. She nodded calm, as if asking me to water her plants. "Your father and I know you'll do the right thing." Dad leaned into the frame, his voice blunt. "You're the responsible one, Evelyn. We all depend on you." That word we always meant him, always meant Logan. I grabbed the rag and wiped my hands. "You mean he depends on me? I'm not doing this again." Mom's smile twitched, turned brittle. "Don't be selfish, Evelyn. Family helps family." I stared at them both, the familiar ache rising in my chest. Behind them, I could see the living room wall, lined with photos every one of Logan. Football trophies, graduation, his arm around them at the lake house. There was never a picture of me alone. "Family doesn't mean debt," I said quietly, then ended the call. The silence afterward was so thick it felt alive. The hose hissed water pooling at my feet. Cicadas screamed in the oak trees, a harsh summer chorus that made the quiet worse. I stood there for a moment, breathing, trying to shake off the familiar guilt that always came after saying no to them. Then I heard it, the low growl of a truck engine turning the corner. Headlights sliced through the fading sunlight. A pickup swerved into my driveway, gravel crunching under its tires. I knew that sound before I even saw the driver. "Logan!" He killed the engine, slammed the door, and staggered out, the heavy scent of beer reaching me before his words did. "Mom said you said no!" he shouted. His voice was half anger, half slur. I straightened, every nerve awake. "That's right. I said no. Go home, Logan." He smirked and started walking toward me, each step deliberate, the bat in his hand catching the last shimmer of sunlight. "Funny thing, Evie," he said, swinging it lightly. "You always think you're better than us." I took a step back. "Put it down. You're drunk." He laughed, an ugly sound that echoed off the garage door. "You've got the money, the house, the job. You think you can just walk away from family. You owe us." "I owe you nothing," I said, my voice steady though my knees trembled. "You made your choices." He moved closer. Shadow long across the driveway. The sky had turned orange and gray, the air heavy. "You talk like Mom's the problem," he muttered. "But she's right. You're selfish." "Get out of my driveway," I said, heart pounding, "or I'll call the police." His smile vanished. "Go ahead." The bat rose. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd just threaten me like he always did when he got drunk and mean. Then came the sound, fast, brutal, the whoosh of air and the crack of metal against bone. The world split in two. White light, then pain, sharp and hot. I fell, my knees hitting the concrete. Blood blurred my vision, dripping down my face. My hand came away red. The sky swam above me, spinning. Through the blur, I saw them. My parents. Standing on the porch across the street. Mom's hands clasped Dad's arms folded. They didn't move. They didn't shout. They didn't run. Logan stood over me, chest heaving, bat limp at his side. For a moment, he looked almost scared. Then he mumbled something, maybe my name, and stumbled back to his truck. The engine roared and he was gone. The world shrank to sound the ringing in my ears, the hiss of the hose still running, the cicadas screaming like sirens. I lay there, the ground warm beneath me, the sky fading from orange to black. Across the street, my parents were still there, silhouettes in the dark, watching. The water from the hose crept closer, soaking the hem of my jeans. Someone shouted Mrs. Halpern maybe, but her voice sounded miles away. My eyelids grew heavy, the pain fading into numbness. Just before everything went dark, I thought the bat hurt less than their silence. When I woke up, everything was white. White walls, white sheets, white light burning into my eyes. My head throbbed with each heartbeat, a slow drum inside my skull. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I was. Then I heard the monitor beep steady and distant and realized I was in a hospital. My throat felt raw, my mouth dry. I tried to move, but the weight of bandages held me still. A nurse appeared beside me, soft voice, calm eyes. "You're safe, Ms. Ward. You've had quite a hit to the head. Do you remember what happened?" I didn't answer. I remembered too well. The bat, the sound, the way my parents stood still. I turned away from her and stared at the IV line feeding into my arm. Safe was not the right word. The door opened again and my mother stepped in clutching a bouquet of fake flowers. Plastic lilies, glossy and perfect. The kind you buy when you don't plan to come back. She smiled the same practiced smile she used when the neighbors were watching. "Sweetheart, you're awake." Thank God. I stared at the lilies. "They look expensive," I said. My voice cracked. She laughed lightly. "Well, you always did like things that last." Her eyes darted to the nurse who took the hint and left. When we were alone, Mom's voice dropped. "You shouldn't have provoked him, Evie. You know how your brother gets when he feels cornered." I blinked. "He hit me with a bat. He didn't mean to hurt you. He's been under a lot of pressure." She placed a hand on mine and I flinched. "Please," she said, "don't press charges. Don't ruin his life. He needs help, not prison." My head spun. "He almost killed me." Her expression hardened. "And what good would it do to send him away? He's your brother. Family has to stick together." That word again. Family. Always used like a weapon. I turned my face toward the window. Outside, the Texas sun glared against the glass. I could see my reflection pale and bruised. A jagged line of stitches snaked along my hairline. I looked like someone else, someone smaller. "Where's Dad?" I asked. "Parking the car," she said. "He's upset too. You scared him." I laughed under my breath, sharp and bitter. "I scared him." She ignored it. "You have to understand, Logan didn't mean it. You pushed him. He was desperate." For what? Another bailout. For forgiveness. She said it softly, like it was wisdom. I closed my eyes. My head pounded. Every word she spoke felt like sandpaper. "You want me to forgive the man who almost crushed my skull?" I whispered. "For the sake of the family," she said. "You'll see. Once he apologizes, we can move forward." The door opened again. Dad stood there, arms folded, face tight, with something between disappointment and irritation. He didn't come close. "You gave your mother quite a scare," he said. I didn't answer. "We need to move past this," he continued. "The police came by earlier. They'll ask if you want to press charges. Think carefully before you do something you'll regret." "Regret," I repeated. "Like getting hit in the head." His jaw clenched. "You've always had a temper. Don't make this worse." "I didn't do anything. You refused to help your brother. You know how fragile he is." I felt the tears sting, but refused to let them fall. "You're unbelievable," I said. "He attacks me and you call him fragile." Mom touched his arm. "She's tired, Richard. Let's let her rest." They left without another word. The door clicked shut. I stared at the ceiling until the sound of the clock on the wall filled the silence. I had never felt so alone. When the nurse returned, she asked if I wanted to file a police report. I opened my mouth, but the words tangled in my throat. I pictured my mother's face the way she said, "Don't ruin his life." I thought about the porch, about them standing there watching. My voice came out small. "No, not right now." The nurse nodded, her expression unreadable. "We'll note that you declined for now. You can always change your mind." When she left, I let the tears come. They slid down my temples and into my hair, quiet, almost invisible. It wasn't just the pain. It was the realization that nothing I could say would matter. They would always protect him. They always had. I thought of being 10 years old watching Logan throw a rock through our neighbor's window. When the police came, Dad told them it was me. I took the blame because Mom said it's just easier that way. And maybe that's when I learned silence. That silence kept peace even when it broke you inside. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of that lesson now pressing against the bandages. The monitor beeped steady and different. My head pulsed in rhythm with it. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly. The world outside went on uncaring while I lay there rehearsing the same question over and over in my mind. How much more of myself would I have to lose to keep their peace? The answer came quietly, as if whispered by the sound of my own heartbeat. Enough. I'd already lost enough. But when I tried to imagine saying it out loud, my mouth wouldn't move. The silence was safer. The silence was what they had trained me to choose. In that silence, I realized I'd been trained not to scream. When I was a child, I thought fairness was something parents taught by example. I learned later that in my family, fairness was a myth, a bedtime story that always ended with Logan getting what he wanted. He was the golden boy, the one Mom called our future CEO. I was the one who kept quiet, who cleaned up, who made good grades, and didn't ask for much. Dad used to ruffle Logan's hair after every mistake, saying, "Boys make errors, that's how they learn." When I brought home a B instead of an A, he said, "You can't afford to slip Evelyn. You're the responsible one." Even then, the difference cut deep. Mom called it balance. I called it favoritism. Logan's room was twice the size of mine, his allowance 3 times larger, but when I asked why, she said, "Because he's under more pressure. Pressure to do what I never knew." He barely studied, barely worked, but they adored him for trying. When Dad lost his job at the factory, I was 16. I took an after-school job at a diner to help with groceries. Logan got a new used car for motivation. They said he needed it to look for work, but he never did. Instead, he drove his friends around burned through gas money, and once when I asked him to pick me up after my shift, he forgot. I walked home 2 miles in the dark and got grounded for being late. That was the night I realized some people are born debtors and some are born banks. I was their bank. Every good deed was an interest payment on a loan I never took. I remember Grandma Ruth watching all this from her chair in the corner. She had sharp eyes, the kind that saw through facades. She'd pull me aside and whisper, "You're the one who'll have to fix what they break, honey. Be ready." At 12, I didn't understand. At 25, I did. Grandma Ruth was the only person who ever saw me as separate from them, not an extension of someone else's need. When she got sick, I stayed with her in Wimberley for months, helping with medication bills, everything. Logan visited once, stayed an hour, and left early to meet friends. When she died, I expected grief to bring the family closer. Instead, it widened the gap. At the reading of her will, I learned she'd left me the Wimberley house, the only real asset our family owned. Mom's face went pale. Dad's lips tightened. Logan smiled faintly like he knew it wouldn't last. 2 weeks later, they told me Grandma's estate had debts that required selling the property. They said it wasn't personal, just practical. I believed them. I signed the paperwork they handed me without reading it. I was 27, naive, and desperate to keep peace. It wasn't until much later that I learned there had been no debts. They had lied, sold the house, and used the money to start one of Logan's doomed ventures. When it failed, they called it bad luck. When I asked for an explanation, Dad said, "You wouldn't understand. It was complicated. I understood perfectly. Complicated meant they'd stolen from me and expected gratitude for it. After that, I stopped visiting. I moved to Austin, found a job as a financial analyst, bought a small condo, and told myself distance was safety. I sent cards on birthdays, kept calls short, and practiced indifference. For a while, it worked. The quiet between us felt like freedom. I'd sit on my balcony on Friday nights watching the city glow, believing I'd escaped. But families like mine don't let go. They orbit you like gravity pulling when you least expect it. The first tug came after Logan's 3rd business failure. A message from Mom. "He's had such bad luck, Evie. You're the only one doing well. Maybe you can help." I ignored it. The next came 6 months later. "Your brother's thinking of moving in with us again. We'll need help with expenses." I ignored that too. Every time I didn't respond, guilt bloomed inside me thick and familiar. I'd been trained to equate love with service. To say no was to be cruel. But that training was eroding. Every ignored message felt like reclamation. I built a life that was mine, career, mortgage, peace. No drama, no manipulation. For the first time, I felt control. Until the night my phone rang again and Mom's voice pulled me back into their orbit, dragging old debts behind it. It was almost poetic that her tone hadn't changed at all. Still sweet, still rehearsed. The only difference was the number $1 million. 1 million. As if years of silence had been interest accruing on a balance I didn't know existed. Standing there in the hospital later, her words echoed in my head. You have to help. It's your duty. Duty. That word had been etched into my bones since childhood. When Logan wrecked the family car, I took the blame. When Dad needed paperwork filed, I stayed up all night. When Grandma died, I handled the funeral while they argued about money. Duty was my inheritance. I wondered if that's what Grandma meant when she said I'd fix what they break. Maybe she hadn't been warning me. Maybe she'd been apologizing. I pressed my hand to the bandage on my head and thought of her voice, raspy and kind. You're stronger than they think, Evie. I hadn't felt strong lying in that hospital bed, but the memory of her steadied me. She had known the truth long before I did. Love in our family was a currency, and I had finally stopped paying. Love was conditional. Duty wasn't. The day I came home from the hospital, the world looked almost too normal. The same oak trees swayed above the driveway, the same cicadas screamed in the heat, and yet everything felt different. My head ached when I bent down the stitches pulling under the bandages, a dull reminder of what my family called a misunderstanding. I told myself I would never answer their calls again. For a few weeks, I kept that promise. I went back to work part-time, my coworkers whispering when they saw the scar near my hairline. I said it was an accident because saying the truth out loud made me feel small. My apartment was quiet at night, too quiet, but the silence was mine. It felt earned. Then, one Thursday evening, as I was reviewing spreadsheets at my kitchen table, the phone buzzed. The name on the screen stopped my breath. Mom. For a moment, I thought about letting it ring out, but old habits are hard to kill. I answered. Her voice came through syrupy sweet, the same tone she used after every disaster. Evie, honey, how are you feeling? I said nothing. We've been worried. Your father wanted to come by, but you made it clear you needed space. I did, I said, finally. And I still do. There was a pause, the kind that meant she was about to pivot. I just wanted to talk about something important. It's about the bank. My stomach clenched. What about it? They're being unreasonable, she said, sighing dramatically. You know how these institutions are. They're insisting that since you're listed as co-signer, you're responsible for the loan balance. I froze. What did you just say? Oh, don't panic, she said lightly. It's just paperwork. You know how confusing these forms can be. They must have used your name by mistake. I pushed back from the table, heart racing. I never signed anything. Sweetheart, she said, her voice lowering to that dangerous calm. We all know you're better with numbers. It was probably just an oversight. But the bank says you need to confirm some details. Confirm, I repeated. Or pay. It's temporary, she said quickly. Just until Logan gets back on his feet. I laughed, sharp and disbelieving. He's never been on his feet. You forged my name, didn't you, Silence? I could hear her breathing through the phone, slow measured. You're being dramatic, she said finally. We would never do that. Then how am I a co-signer on $1 million loan I've never seen because you're part of this family, she snapped. Everything we have, we built together. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. You built debt. I built distance. Her voice softened again, pretending concern. Don't say things you'll regret. You know how Logan gets when he feels betrayed. The words hit me like a physical slap. You mean when he feels entitled? He's your brother. He's my attacker, I said. You watched him hit me. You're exaggerating, she said, her tone brittle. We were too far away to see what really happened. You saw enough to do nothing. I could hear her inhale sharply. Evie, if you start accusing us publicly, people will think you're ungrateful. You don't want to ruin our reputation. Your reputation, I repeated. You're worried about that. You always overreact, she said quickly. It's why we didn't tell you sooner. Tell me what I asked, voice trembling. There was a shuffle on the line, and then my father's voice replaced hers. Deep, deliberate. Evelyn, enough. You're making a scene. We handled things the best we could. You'll talk to the bank tomorrow and straighten this out. By pay, you mean, I said. We already transferred what we could, he replied. They need your confirmation for the rest. You stole my signature, I whispered. We did what was necessary, he said coldly. Family looks out for each other. No, I said. You look out for him. Always him. You've always resented your brother, Dad said. It's ugly. I couldn't breathe. The call ended, not with words, but with the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears. I set the phone down and stared at it, the screen still glowing with their number. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold a glass of water. For a long time, I sat there frozen between rage and disbelief. The apartment seemed smaller, the air heavier. The clock ticked loudly each second, hammering the same truth into my skull. They had stolen from me again, only this time it wasn't money. It was identity. I opened my laptop and searched my email. My stomach dropped when I saw a message from Summit Trust Bank, subject line, cosigner confirmation required. The message was polite, formal, and devastating. It listed my name, my address, and the loan amount, exactly $1 million. There was even a digital signature that looked almost like mine, except for the curve on the E, the same loop Mom used when signing Christmas cards. My pulse quickened. I scrolled down, reading every line until the letters blurred. If you believe this agreement is fraudulent, please contact our Fraud and Risk Division. Fraud. The word seemed too small for what they'd done. I leaned back in the chair, the room spinning. My parents hadn't asked for my help. They'd stolen it. I clicked the reply button and stared at the blinking cursor, unsure what to say. I wanted to write something cold and sharp, something that would pierce through their denial, but the words wouldn't come. All I could think about was how familiar the betrayal felt. How ordinary. I closed the laptop slowly and whispered to the empty room. They've been forging my life since I was a child. My reflection in the window stared back at me, pale and tired. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed, rising and falling like a warning I had ignored too many times. I made a promise to myself, then quiet but absolute. This time, I wouldn't stay silent. The next morning, I walked into Summit Trust Bank with my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The air inside was cold and smelled faintly of disinfectant and money. I had rehearsed what I would say all night, but when I reached the teller's counter, my voice still trembled. I need to speak to someone in loan services, I said. The woman behind the desk glanced at the bandage near my hairline, her expression softening. Of course, ma'am. Do you have an appointment? No, I said, but this can't wait. She typed something on her computer, then gestured toward a small seating area. Someone will be with you shortly. I sat down, hands clasped, staring at the polished floor tiles. They reminded me of the hospital, too clean, too bright, pretending to erase the damage underneath. After a few minutes, a man in a navy suit appeared, holding a clipboard. Ms. Ward, he asked politely. I nodded. His name tag read Eric, Senior Loan Officer. He led me into a glass office that smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner. I sat across from him as he closed the door and adjusted his tie. What seems to be the issue? I took a deep breath. There's a loan under my name. $1 million. I didn't sign for it. His eyebrows lifted slightly. That's quite serious. Do you have identification? I handed him my driver's license. He typed for a few moments, eyes scanning the screen. Then he turned the monitor slightly so I could see. This is the loan in question, he said. Issued last November, co-signed by you and Mr. Logan Ward. Payment overdue, 90 days. My name glared back at me in digital ink. I swallowed hard. That's not my signature. He leaned closer. It looks very close. It's not, I said. Look at the E. I never curl it like that. He zoomed in on the document, tracing the line with his pen. You're right, he said slowly. That's a different hand. We'll need to verify it against your records. He printed the document and handed it to me. My hand shook as I held the paper. The signature was neat, deliberate, practiced. I'd seen it before on birthday cards, report cards, permission slips. My mother's E, the same elegant curve that looked like pride and control. A chill ran through me. That's her, I whispered. She forged it. Eric cleared his throat. Are you suggesting identity fraud? I'm not suggesting, I said. I'm telling you. He nodded cautiously. Then we'll need to escalate this to the Fraud and Risk Department. They'll open an investigation, but I should be transparent. It's not a quick process. How long? Weeks? Maybe months. What happens in the meantime? The loan remains active unless we can prove falsification. I stared at him. So, until I prove my innocence, I'm guilty. He didn't argue. You could file a police report. It might strengthen your case. I almost laughed. File a report against my parents. The words sounded absurd even to me. He hesitated. I've seen worse, he said quietly. Fraud isn't always committed by strangers. He handed me a business card. Here's the contact for our fraud investigator. And Ms. Ward, if what you're saying is true, don't wait too long. These things get complicated. I thanked him and walked out into the blinding sun, gripping the papers so tightly the edges cut into my palm. The parking lot shimmered with heat. I sat in my car for several minutes staring at the loan document. The numbers blurred. My mother's handwriting stared back like an accusation. My phone buzzed. A new message. Mom. Hope, you're not doing anything foolish today. Call me before you talk to anyone. My breath caught. She knew. Somehow she knew. I turned off the phone, dropped it into the cup holder, and started the engine. As I drove home, I tried to make sense of it all. Every memory twisted itself into a pattern I'd never wanted to see. The times she had asked me to sign this for Dad when I was a teenager, the blank checks she filled out for emergencies, the way she handled every bill and insisted I didn't need to know the details. It wasn't care. It was conditioning. She'd been training me to trust her handwriting more than my own. At home, I spread the papers across my kitchen table. My head throbbed again, the pain deep and pulsing. The documents were stamped notarized clean. The system had already accepted her lie as truth. I ran my fingers over the signature and felt anger rise like heat. This wasn't just theft, it was ownership. She hadn't taken my money. She had taken my identity. I took out an old photo album from the shelf, flipping through pictures. There she was smiling beside Logan at his high school graduation, her hand on his shoulder. I wasn't in that frame. I was behind the camera. I closed the album. For years, I thought I'd escaped her control by moving away. But she'd followed me through the lines of every document, every obligation. She didn't need to speak to control me anymore. Her handwriting did it for her. I stared at the bank papers one last time and whispered, "Not anymore." The words felt like a promise. I picked up the phone and dialed the number Eric had given me. A calm voice answered Summit Trust Fraud and Risk Department. "How can I help you?" My voice shook, but I forced the words out. "I need to report a case of identity theft." "All right," the woman said. "Do you know who the perpetrator is?" I hesitated, then said it clearly. "My mother." There was a pause, a small intake of breath on the other end. "Understood," she said finally. "Let's get started." As I began listing dates and details, the fear in my chest slowly shifted into something colder, sharper. Determination. For the first time, I wasn't covering for them. I wasn't fixing what they broke. I was naming it. When the call ended, I sat back in my chair and looked at the papers again. The signature that once felt like a trap now felt like evidence. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that love had been a mask. She'd been signing my life away since I was 6. By the time I invited them to dinner, the decision felt less like courage and more like inevitability. I needed to look them in the eyes. I needed to see if guilt even registered behind their practiced smiles. The house was spotless that evening. Candles flickered on the table, the kind my mother used to light on holidays, the ones that smelled faintly of vanilla and deceit. I cooked roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and cornbread, every comfort food from our family dinners growing up. The aroma filled the air, familiar yet tainted. I set 3 plates, polished the silverware, and placed the bank documents neatly beneath a folded napkin at my seat. When the doorbell rang, my heart tightened. I opened the door to find them both standing there, dressed as though they were visiting a church, not the daughter their son had nearly killed. Mom smiled, first arms outstretched. "Oh, honey, it's good to see you. You look pale. Are you eating?" Her voice carried that same false tenderness that had once fooled neighbors and pastors alike. Dad gave a curt nod. "Evening, Evelyn." I stepped aside. "Come in." The air shifted as they entered. They looked around as though inspecting the space, searching for signs of weakness. Mom touched a framed picture on the console table, a photo of me at graduation, one she had never attended. "Nice place," she said. "Smaller than I imagined, but cozy." I ignored the jab. "Dinner's ready." We sat down. The scrape of cutlery was too loud in the silence. For a few minutes we ate mechanically. Finally, Mom dabbed her mouth with a napkin and said, "This is lovely. You've always been such a good hostess." I looked at her hands, steady as ever, her nails painted the same soft pink as the day I saw her on that video call. "I didn't invite you for dinner," I said. "I invited you for truth." Dad's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "What's that supposed to mean?" I slid the folder across the table, unfolding the loan documents. "These," I said quietly. "The ones you signed with my name." Mom blinked, feigning confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You forged my signature," I said, "on a $1 million loan for Logan." "That's absurd," Dad snapped. "You're imagining things." The bank verified the handwriting I said, and the IP address where the form was submitted came from your house. The silence that followed was almost theatrical. Then Mom's shoulder softened, her voice lowering into something that sounded like sorrow. "Evie, we did it for the family, for your brother. He was desperate. We couldn't watch him drown, so you decided to drag me under instead." "You have more than enough," she said almost gently. "You always have. It's not fair to hold everything while your brother suffers." "He doesn't suffer," I said. "He drinks, he gambles, he destroys everything you hand him, and you still call it love." Dad's face darkened. "That's your brother you're talking about." "That's my attacker," I said sharply. "You stood there and watched him hit me." Mom shook her head, eyes glistening. "You're being cruel. He's not well. You have to forgive." I laughed, a brittle sound that made them flinch. "Forgive you stole my identity and let him break my skull. What exactly should I forgive first?" "We didn't mean for it to go that far," Mom whispered. "We just needed to save the family home." "What family home?" I asked. "You already sold Grandma Ruth's house to fund his last business." The color drained from her face. "How do you know about that?" "The title records," I said. "You signed those too. The proceeds went into an account under Logan's name. You sold her legacy for another of his failures." Her mouth trembled. She would have wanted us to use it for him. "No," I said, leaning forward. "She told me to fix what you break. But this isn't fixable." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. We're not criminals, we're family." "You're thieves," I said quietly. "You forged, you lied. You watched your son nearly kill your daughter, and you stood there doing nothing." His jaw clenched. "You've always been ungrateful." Ungrateful. The word hit me like a spark. You took everything I ever earned and called it love. You used my credit, my name, my body when it suited your reputation, and you never once said thank you. I don't owe you anything." Mom's tears came then, perfect and timed. "We just wanted to help him. He's sick." "He's spoiled," I said, "because you made him that way." The clock ticked on the wall loud enough to fill the space between us. I could feel my pulse in my temples, but beneath the anger there was something else, clarity. For the first time, I saw them as they really were. Not parents, not protectors, but architects of a lie so deep they believed it themselves. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping the tile. "I've already filed a report," I said. "With the bank, with the fraud department. They'll be contacting you." Mom's hand flew to her chest. "You wouldn't do that. I already did." "You'll destroy us," she said. "No," I replied. "You destroyed me first." Dad stood, his face red. "You think you're better than us, but you're just bitter. You'll regret this." I met his stare. "I've been living in regret since I was old enough to sign my own name. That ends tonight." He stormed toward the door. Mom lingered, eyes wide, mascara smudged. "We were trying to keep this family together," she whispered. "Then maybe it deserves to fall apart," I said. She left without another word. When the door closed, the house fell silent except for the soft crackle of the candles. I looked down at the folder on the table. The papers inside weren't just proof of fraud, they were proof of liberation. For years, I'd believed forgiveness meant endurance. Tonight, forgiveness meant exposure. I blew out the candles, watching the smoke curl upward and fade. The air smelled like freedom and ash. "You didn't just sell her house," I whispered to the empty room. "You sold her love." The fallout began faster than I expected. Within a week of that dinner, I received a letter from a law firm representing my brother. The envelope was thick, official, and heavy with arrogance. The letter accused me of defamation, harassment, and emotional distress. It demanded that I cease false accusations and apologize publicly for damaging Logan Ward's reputation. I read it twice numb before laughter escaped me short, disbelieving, almost hysterical. The man who shattered my skull was now claiming emotional damage. My attorney, a colleague from work named Karen, who owed me a favor, told me not to respond. "They're bluffing," she said. "Let them hang themselves with their own rope." I wanted to believe her, but the anxiety crawled under my skin like fire ants. The next blow came when my company's HR department called me in. "We received an anonymous complaint," the manager said carefully. "Someone claims you've been under investigation for fraud." My stomach dropped. "That's not true." "I believe you," she said, "but we have to follow procedure. You'll be placed on paid leave while we review." The shame hit harder than I expected. Walking out of the office felt like walking into exile. Colleagues looked up from their desks, pretending not to stare. My badge didn't beep when I swiped it at the elevator. That night, I sat in my car outside the building for an hour, gripping the steering wheel. The city lights blurred through the windshield, and I realized I was crying. It wasn't just fear, it was the exhaustion of fighting ghosts that wore my family's faces. I drove home on autopilot, passing the familiar streets, the same oak trees, the same quiet houses. But when I reached my driveway, the headlights caught something glinting near the porch. A rock. Attached to it, a note in my brother's handwriting. "You'll regret this, Evie." The words crawled under my skin. I checked the locks twice, closed every curtain, and sat on the couch holding the phone, debating whether to call the police. But what would I say? That my brother, the same man I hadn't pressed charges against, was threatening me now. They'd file it under family drama. I placed the rock in a drawer instead, like evidence of my own foolish hope that silence once meant safety. 2 days later, I received a call from the fraud department at Summit Trust. The investigator, a calm woman named Andrea, confirmed that the signatures were under review by their legal team. We also found multiple loan applications from the same IP address, she said. "They appear to trace back to your parents' home." My throat tightened. "So, it's confirmed. It's very likely," she said. "But before we can take action, we'll need a formal statement and possibly law enforcement involvement." I agreed, though the idea of walking into a police station filled me with dread. Still, I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, I drafted a statement. Every sentence felt like reopening a wound. The next morning, before I could send it, my email pinged again. The subject line read, "Crazy woman shouldn't handle clients' money." The message was short, cruel, and anonymous. Another one followed an hour later. "Maybe you should have kept your mouth shut." I stared at the screen, realizing someone, probably Logan, was trying to bury me in fear. Each message felt like a phantom knock on the door. I reported them blocked the sender, but the damage was done. I barely slept that week. Every creak of the house made me flinch. I began hearing things, whispers behind the walls, the faint hum of my name in the air conditioner. I wasn't losing my mind, but they wanted me to think I was. One night around midnight, I heard something outside. A soft thud near the window, then another. My pulse raced. I peered through the blinds and saw nothing but darkness. Still, I grabbed the baseball bat from the hall closet. The irony wasn't lost on me, and waited in silence. After 10 minutes, I heard footsteps retreating down the driveway. The next morning, I found muddy footprints by the back door. My hands shook as I took photos. I sent them to Andrea at the bank and to Karen, who insisted I file a police report. "He's escalating," she said. "Don't give him the chance to finish what he started." At the station, the officer took notes, but his tone was weary. "Family disputes are messy," he said. "Keep your doors locked and document everything." As if documentation could stop a man who already knew how to break skulls and laws. That night, I realized fear had become a roommate. It sat beside me at the table, followed me to bed, watched me brush my teeth. I caught myself checking the locks over and over until my reflection in the window looked like a stranger. Sometimes I thought I saw movement in the shadows, a flicker, a shape, but when I turned, nothing was there. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Then came the worst message yet sent to my work email, though I was on leave. Attached was a photo of me standing outside the bank, taken the morning I went to meet Eric. The caption read, "You shouldn't have gone there." I stared at it until my vision blurred. My brother wasn't just threatening me, he was watching me. The thought of him somewhere close, camera in hand, made my stomach twist. I forwarded the email to Andrea and Karen, both urging me again to file for a restraining order. I promised I would, though part of me still hesitated. After all, hesitation was how they had trained me to doubt myself before doubting them. That night, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling, and recorded a video message on my phone. "If anything happens to me," I said, staring into the lens my brother Logan Ward did it, "and my parents helped cover it up." I saved it to the cloud, then stared at my reflection in the dark screen. The woman looking back at me wasn't fragile anymore. She was furious. "Fear doesn't knock," I whispered to the empty house. "It lives with you." The words hung in the air, heavy and certain. I knew then that this wouldn't end quietly. They wanted me to break. They wanted me silent, but I'd already learned what silence costs. After the chaos of those weeks, the house fell into a strange kind of quiet. It wasn't peace. It was the quiet that follows an explosion when the smoke is still thick and every breath reminds you something is missing. I lived inside that silence like it was another body. I stopped answering calls, stopped checking emails, and let the days blur together. My blinds stayed closed, the lights dim. The only sound came from the clock in the kitchen, its rhythm as steady as my pulse. I didn't feel safe, but I felt invisible, and that was close enough. Every night, I sat at the same table where my parents once denied everything and watched the same candle burn down a little further. The wax hardened in strange shapes, frozen moments of what used to be warmth. I replayed everything in my head, the dinner, the rock on the porch, the hospital, the phone calls. It was like watching the same movie on repeat, hoping the ending might change. I thought often of Grandma Ruth. She used to say that truth was like water. It finds a way through stone eventually. Maybe that's why silence scared me so much now. It wasn't just absence, it was stagnation, and if I stayed still too long, their lies would harden around me. One morning, I woke to sunlight slipping through the curtains and realized I hadn't left the house in 3 days. My hair was greasy, my hands shaking from too much coffee and too little sleep. The mirror showed a face I barely recognized, eyes, hollow skin, pale lips pressed thin. I turned away. On the counter sat the voice recorder I had used for work interviews before all this. I stared at it, then pressed record. "My name is Evelyn Ward," I said quietly. "This is my statement." My voice cracked, but I kept talking. I told the story from the beginning, the phone call, the loan, the hit, the silence. Every detail I'd buried came pouring out raw and unpolished. When I finished, the red light blinked steadily. I played it back. Hearing my own voice tremble and harden in turns made something click inside me. It wasn't weakness to speak, it was evidence that I had survived. That evening, I opened my laptop for the first time in days and started compiling everything: emails, letters, bank documents, screenshots of threats. I organized them into folders labeled by date. When I reached the last folder, I added the audio recording and renamed it Truth. For the first time in weeks, my heartbeat felt steady. That night, as I was shutting down the computer, an old file caught my eye recordings from my dinner table camera. I had installed it months ago after the first time someone tried to break in. Out of habit, I clicked play. There it was, my parents sitting across from me. My father's hand slamming the table, my mother's face tightening as I exposed them. Their voices filled the kitchen again, ghosts made of pixels. At the end of the video after they left, I noticed something I hadn't before. My father, standing near the doorway, looked back one last time. His lips moved, but the sound was faint. I turned up the volume. He said, "You'll regret this." The words weren't a warning. They were a promise. I paused the video and stared at his frozen face. The fear that had lived in me for so long turned into something else. A quiet anger, almost peaceful in its precision. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was documenting. The next day, I took a flash drive and copied every file. I hid one in my office, one in the glove compartment, and mailed another to Karen. Paranoia, maybe, but I called it insurance. The world outside was still spinning traffic laughter, people shopping, living, and I was here, rebuilding piece by piece. Every night before bed, I lit a candle for Grandma Ruth and whispered, "Justice is slow, but it doesn't forget." It became a prayer. Some evenings I'd hear the wind move through the trees outside and imagine her voice riding the air. "Don't let them rewrite the story, Evie," she'd say. "Write it yourself." So I did. I started journaling again, small entries that grew longer each night. They weren't about revenge, they were about remembering. The way Mom's perfume always smelled like roses and guilt. The way Dad's silence could fill an entire room. The way Logan's laughter sounded like triumph even when he was losing. Putting the words down was like exorcising ghosts. One night, I fell asleep at the table, the notebook open beneath my arm. I dreamed of Grandma's house in Wimberley, the porch swing creaking softly, her hand resting over mine. She smiled and said, "Truth isn't loud, sweetheart. It's patient." I woke up crying, the good kind of tears, the kind that wash something clean. The world was still broken, but I wasn't shattered anymore. There was stillness inside me now, but not the kind that paralyzed. It was the stillness before movement, the breath before a decision. I poured myself coffee, opened my laptop, and drafted an email to the fraud investigator. "Andrea," I wrote, "I'm ready to escalate." Before I could overthink it, I hit send. The sound of that click echoed like a heartbeat. I looked around the quiet house one more time, the candle flickering, the clock ticking, and realized I wasn't trapped in the stillness anymore. I was using it. If they could weaponize family, I could weaponize truth. His name was Daniel Torres, and when he first walked into the small Denver field office where Andrea had arranged our meeting, I didn't expect much. He looked ordinary, khaki jacket, tired eyes, a faint limp, but there was something steady about him, the kind of calm you only see in people who have already lived through storms. Andrea introduced us briefly. "Former FBI Financial Crimes Division," she said. "He consults on identity theft cases now. If anyone can help you, it's him." Daniel extended his hand. His grip was firm, his voice low. "Ms. Ward, I've read your file. You've been through hell." I almost laughed. That's one word for it. He gave a faint smile. "Then let's start pulling you back." We sat in a glass-walled conference room, the kind where everything echoed. He opened his laptop, the glow lighting his face as he scrolled through digital copies of the bank statements, forged signatures, and emails I'd gathered. "You're meticulous," he said. "That's good. Fraudsters always leave traces. They get confident sloppy." His tone was clinical, but his eyes softened when he looked at me. This wasn't random. It was a coordinated fraud triangle: motive, opportunity, and trust. Your family had all three. I nodded slowly. Hearing him say it out loud so simply made something in my chest break and settle at the same time. "So what now?" I asked. "We start with digital forensics," he replied. "Every electronic signature, IP address, login, timestamp, it all leaves a trail, even if they tried to erase it." He leaned back, studying me. "Do you know when the documents were supposedly signed? 8 months ago," I said. "While I was working 80-hour weeks during the audit season." "Perfect alibi," he said. "We'll prove you couldn't have signed anything then." He plugged in a flash drive and started running comparison software. The silence between keystrokes was almost hypnotic. He worked methodically, eyes darting between lines of code. Finally, he turned the screen toward me. "Look here," he said. The login credentials used for the loan application came from an IP address tied to a Wi-Fi network registered under Richard and Lydia Ward. Your parents. The confirmation hit like a quiet earthquake. I exhaled slowly. So, it's not just handwriting, it's digital proof. And that he said is how we turn their crime into a federal case. He spent hours going through metadata, timestamps, geolocations, document revisions. Each click unearthed a new layer of deceit. At one point, he paused, frowning. "There's something else," he murmured. "The application wasn't filed just once. It was resubmitted multiple times under slightly different versions. Why, I asked. To test limits, he said. Sometimes fraudsters tweak numbers to see what passes automatic review. The bank's system logs those attempts. He clicked through one of the drafts, and my stomach twisted when I saw the edit trail Mom's email address attached to the revisions. Daniel looked at me. She wasn't just covering for your brother. She was actively managing the fraud. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. She always said she was good with paperwork. Daniel's jaw tightened. Good enough to commit felony forgery. He pulled out a notepad, scribbling notes in a shorthand that looked like code. You're lucky, he said. Most victims never get this level of proof. We'll be able to reconstruct everything. I watched him work the glow of the monitor reflecting in his glasses. There was something oddly comforting about his precision, like he was untangling the chaos that had suffocated me for months. When we finally wrapped up, he closed the laptop gently. Evelyn, he said, his tone shifting from professional to personal, I need you to understand something. People like your family, they count on shame to silence their victims. You didn't just survive this. You documented it. That's power. I swallowed hard. I don't feel powerful. You don't have to yet, he said. That comes when they face consequences. As I left the building, the Denver air felt sharper, cleaner. For the first time, the weight on my chest eased. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel and I spoke daily. He traced the paper trail, subpoenaed digital records, even pulled archived ISP data. His updates came like steady heartbeats, small wins building toward something bigger. The forged signature, he told me one morning, was created using a high-resolution scan of your mortgage documents. Someone accessed them from your parents' home computer. My pulse quickened. How would they even get those? They probably kept a copy when you bought the condo, he said. Old habit control disguised as care. That line lingered with me long after the call ended. Control disguised as care. It defined my whole childhood. One evening, Daniel called unexpectedly. His voice was low but urgent. Evelyn, can you come to my office tomorrow morning? I found something you need to see in person. The next day, I drove there early, the city still waking up, sunlight breaking through the skyline. When I arrived, he gestured for me to sit. He looked tired but satisfied. We pulled records from your brother's failed company, Innovate Tech Solutions, he said. Buried in the bankruptcy filings were internal emails between him, your father, and your mother. He slid a printed copy across the table. My eyes scanned the lines. Use Evelyn's credit. She owes us anyway. Then another. She won't find out until we're done. My breath caught. This is real. Filed under public record, he said. The company's email server was subpoenaed during bankruptcy proceedings. Nobody thought to delete the messages. I ran my finger over the paper as if touching the words could make them less vile. They used my name like a tool, I whispered. They used your life like collateral, he corrected softly. I felt my hands tremble, but the tears didn't come. I was past tears. What happens now? I asked. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes steady. Now we take this to federal investigators. This isn't just family betrayal anymore. It's bank fraud, identity theft conspiracy. They crossed state lines with those emails. That makes it federal. The word federal sounded like thunder in my chest. For months, I'd been surviving day to day. Now, for the first time, there was an end game. I'll back you up, he said. Every line of evidence, every timestamp. We'll make it airtight. I looked at him, then really looked and realized that trust, the thing my family had weaponized against me, could still exist. Maybe it just had to be earned differently. I stood up steady for the first time in months. They didn't just steal my money, I said quietly. They stole my name. Daniel nodded. Then let's give it back to you. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain. It smelled like a beginning. The morning Daniel called it proof, I didn't quite believe him. For months, every new piece of evidence had felt like another loose thread in a tangled web that never ended. But this time was different. His voice carried certainty, not speculation. It's all here, Evelyn, he said. Emails, signatures, timelines, enough to bury them. I drove to his office under a gray sky that threatened rain. The air smelled of dust and electricity, that restless calm before a storm. When I arrived, Daniel had already printed everything. Stacks of paper covered his desk like layered crime scenes, bank forms, notarized pages, internal memos. At the center was a folder labeled simply Ward Case Primary Evidence. He handed it to me. "Read this," he said. The first document was an email thread from 8 months ago. My mother wrote, "Use Evelyn's financials for verification. The bank trusts her record." Then my father replied, "She won't find out. We'll manage it before audit season ends." And finally, my brother. His casual cruelty dripping through every word. Mom's good at signatures. "Just copy from her mortgage file. Evelyn won't notice anything until it's done." My eyes blurred halfway through, not from tears, but from sheer disbelief at how easy they had made it sound. There were more. Attachments showing account numbers tied to my identity, scanned IDs, lifted from old family tax folders, even a notary seal dated on a day I was out of state. "They didn't just forge me," I said quietly. "They built an entire version of me that existed only to serve them." Daniel nodded. "That's how fraud works at its most dangerous. They don't need to steal your identity, they replace it." He pointed to the metadata on the documents. Every timestamp ties back to their devices. Even their IP addresses match. And here's the key, because they used email to communicate every message passed through interstate servers. That means wire fraud. I stared at the bold letters at the top of the report, federal jurisdiction applicable. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the office printer was the only sound. Finally, I whispered, "So what happens next?" "We take it to the FBI," he said. "But first we protect you. Once they know you found this, they'll panic." He was right. Panic was their language. I'd seen it in my father's clenched jaw at dinner, in my mother's trembling denial, in Logan's smirk that hid desperation. That afternoon, we drafted the formal complaint. Daniel walked me through each section line by line. Allegation: identity theft. Supporting evidence: forged documents, digital verification bank statements, email trails. Victims: Evelyn Ward. Suspects: Richard Ward, Lydia Ward, Logan Ward. Total value: one $1,000 loan, plus collateral fraud. The words felt unreal, like a crime show script that accidentally used my name. But the ink on those pages was real. My heartbeat quickened as I signed my statement. "They won't see this coming," Daniel said. "They still think you're scared." I said. "Not anymore." We filed everything digitally, copying Andrea from the bank and a contact Daniel still had at the bureau. Then we waited. Waiting was its own kind of torture. Every day felt suspended between fear and vindication. I worked part-time from home again, barely speaking to anyone. My coworkers thought I was recovering from stress. They didn't know the storm I was preparing to unleash. 2 weeks later, Daniel called. "They're in," he said. "The Bureau reviewed the evidence and accepted jurisdiction. They're assigning a case number. Agents will be in touch." I nearly dropped the phone. My knees went weak, but this time from relief. For months, I'd been begging for someone to listen. Now, someone finally had. The next step was a sworn deposition. Daniel arranged for it to be recorded at his office. The agent, a woman named Special Agent Klein, arrived with the precision of someone who didn't waste words. She shook my hand firmly. "We appreciate your cooperation, Ms. Ward. What your family did constitutes multiple federal crimes. You did the right thing documenting everything." Her tone was neutral, but her eyes sharp. She asked questions for hours, dates, details, motives. Every time I hesitated, Daniel nodded from across the table, grounding me. When it was done, she said, "We'll be moving quickly. Expect search warrants within weeks." The idea of them facing consequences still felt distant, like watching thunder from miles away. But it was coming. I could feel it. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through my quiet house past the framed pictures I'd stopped looking at: family vacations, graduations, birthdays. Every smile in those photos now looked like a disguise. I stood in front of the one from my college graduation, the one where Logan had his arm around my shoulder. My cap was crooked, his grin perfect. I lifted it off the wall and set it face down. They had stolen enough of my story. Around midnight, I received an encrypted email from Daniel. It contained one last file, something he had found while cross-referencing the corporate bankruptcy logs. Inside was an audio recording pulled from the company's internal drive. I clicked play. My brother's voice filled the room. Dad, the loan went through. The cosigner verification was easy. Mom handled the call. They didn't even question it. My father's voice followed. Good. Keep your mouth shut. Evelyn's too busy to notice. Then laughter my mother's. See? I told you family helps family. I froze. That sound so familiar, so maternal, now twisted into something monstrous. It wasn't just evidence, it was confession. I sent the file to Agent Klein immediately. Her reply came within the hour, received. This changes everything. The next morning, Daniel met me at a cafe downtown. They're moving fast, he said. Your mother's verification call was logged through the bank's customer service line. The recording is still in their archives. They verified her voice against the email you found. It's irrefutable. I took a sip of coffee, my hands trembling only slightly. So they can't deny it. They'll try, he said, but the paper trail is airtight, and when the agents show up at their door, it'll be over. I stared out the window at the city, waking up people rushing to work, holding coffees, laughing, living. For the first time in almost a year, I felt like one of them. The fear that had once suffocated me was replaced by something fiercer. Purpose. It's time, I said softly. Daniel nodded. Let's give justice a voice. The morning they came for my family began like any other quiet, gray, unassuming. I was pouring coffee when my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. It's happening, he said. His tone was steady, but beneath it I could hear restrained adrenaline. FBI agents are executing the warrants now. My heart clenched. For months, I had dreamed of this day, imagined the moment justice would finally knock on their door. But as I stood there, mug in hand, I realized justice doesn't knock, it arrives. I drove to Daniel's office, the city passing in slow motion. The clouds hung low over Denver, heavy like the weight that had followed me for almost a year. When I stepped into the lobby, Daniel was already by the window, phone pressed to his ear. He turned when he saw me. They're in, he said. Your brother's apartment first, then your parents' house. He hesitated, then added, They found documents, original loan files, blank signature sheets, a flash drive with financial records. It's exactly what we needed. I exhaled, trying to steady myself. What about them? Your brother resisted, Daniel said grimly. He tried to delete files from his laptop when they entered. It didn't work. I closed my eyes, picturing the chaos. For once, his arrogance had done me a favor. A few hours later, my phone rang again, Special Agent Klein. Ms. Ward, the suspects are in custody. You'll be updated as we process charges. I thanked her, my voice barely audible. When I hung up, the silence that followed felt foreign, like a language I hadn't spoken in years. Relief didn't come right away. It arrived slowly, cautiously, as if testing whether it was safe. Daniel placed a folder in front of me. You did this, he said. All of it started with you refusing to be quiet. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. A week later, the official charges were released to the press: United States versus Richard Ward, Lydia Ward, and Logan Ward. Counts included bank fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit identity theft, and falsifying federal financial documents. I read the headline 3 times before it sank in. My parents' names, my brother's name, printed for the world to see. For so long they had controlled the story. Now the story was evidence. The first court hearing was surreal. The courthouse smelled faintly of floor polish and tension. I wore a Navy suit professional armor and sat behind the prosecution table with Daniel and Agent Klein. Across the aisle, my parents sat together holding hands like a pair of nervous churchgoers. My mother's hair was neatly curled, her lips trembling just enough to draw sympathy from the cameras. My father's jaw was clenched, eyes cold. Logan sat 1 seat away in a wrinkled suit that did nothing to hide his defiance. When the judge entered the room, shifted into silence. The charges were read aloud, each word like a nail sealing the coffin of their lies. Count 1. Conspiracy to commit bank fraud. Count 2. Aggravated identity theft. Count 3. Wire fraud across state lines. My pulse matched the rhythm of the clerk's voice. My mother flinched when the prosecutor displayed the emails, the same ones Daniel had found in the bankruptcy records. Use Evelyn's credit. She owes us anyway. The courtroom projector illuminated those words larger than life. My father avoided looking at me. Logan stared straight ahead, jaw tight. When the prosecutor played the audio recording, the one where they laughed about the forged signature, my mother's composure cracked. Her hands trembled, lips quivering. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Is that your voice, Mrs. Ward?" My mother hesitated. I don't recall." The prosecutor pressed. "But that's you, verifying a forged loan, correct?" She lowered her gaze. "It might be." The tension in the room was electric. I could feel every eye turning toward me, measuring my silence. For months, silence had been my cage. Now it was my weapon. The defense tried their best. They painted my family as misguided, desperate victims of circumstance. My father's lawyer claimed it was a misunderstanding, that the documents had been signed in confusion, that no one intended harm. My mother's attorney argued emotional manipulation, that she acted out of maternal instinct to protect her son. Logan's defense was worse. He blamed addiction stress. Even me. "My sister provoked this," he said on the stand. "She threatened to ruin us." I felt Daniel tense beside me. The prosecutor stood calmly. "Ms. Ward, did you threaten your family?" I met Logan's eyes. "No," I said. I told them I was done being their scapegoat. The judge nodded slightly, a flicker of understanding passing over his expression. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Each day peeled another layer off their facades. Witnesses from the bank testified. The notary who had falsely validated my signature admitted under oath that my mother had brought the documents already signed. "I was told she was acting on behalf of her daughter," the notary said, voice shaking. I believed her. The judge's tone sharpened. "You notarized without witnessing a signature?" "Yes, Your Honor." The courtroom murmured. Every revelation built like thunder. Then came the forensic analyst explaining how the loan files were digitally linked to my parents' home network. "The metadata timestamps align perfectly," he said. "This was deliberate, coordinated, and sustained over several months." The defense tried one last time to shift blame. The family simply misunderstood financial processes, they argued. They didn't mean to defraud anyone. The prosecutor's rebuttal was surgical. Misunderstanding doesn't produce forged signatures, falsified audio verifications, or hidden flash drives labeled E-Ward documents. That's not confusion, that's conspiracy. When closing arguments ended, I looked across the aisle. My mother's tears were gone. She sat hollow-eyed, her hand gripping Dad's sleeve. Logan fidgeted, restless, unable to mask his fear. I wondered if he remembered the feel of the bat in his hand, the weight of what he'd done. Maybe now, finally, he would. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I sat in the hallway outside, the hum of vending machines and distant footsteps blending into a low symphony of anxiety. Daniel handed me coffee I couldn't drink. "No matter the verdict," he said quietly, "you already won." But I wanted more than symbolic victory. I wanted recognition that what they did wasn't just immoral, it was criminal. When the bailiff called us back in, my stomach twisted. The jury filed in, faces unreadable. The foreman stood. "On count 1, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, we find the defendants guilty. On count 2, aggravated identity theft, guilty. On count 3, wire fraud, guilty. On count 4, obstruction of justice, guilty." Each word landed like a heartbeat. My breath came shallow. Across the room, my mother began to cry softly. My father's head dropped. Logan muttered something under his breath I couldn't hear. The judge nodded solemnly. "This court thanks the jury for their service. Sentencing will proceed in 30 days. The courtroom erupted in low chatter. Reporters scribbled notes. Flashbulbs popped. I sat still, gripping the edge of the bench, the reality of it sinking in. They were guilty. Not just in my heart, not just in the quiet moral sense that had haunted me, but in the eyes of the law. 30 days later, we returned for sentencing. The air was heavier this time, thick with consequence. The judge's words echoed off the marble walls. "Richard Ward, you enabled a conspiracy that defrauded financial institutions and betrayed your own daughter. Lydia Ward, you facilitated and verified the fraud knowingly. Logan Ward, you orchestrated this scheme and physically assaulted your sister to silence her. This court finds your actions reprehensible." My parents wept openly now. Logan's jaw trembled. Therefore, the judge continued, "Logan, Ward is sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. Richard Ward and Lydia Ward are each sentenced to 3 years of supervised custody and restitution in the amount of $800,000 payable to Evelyn Ward. I didn't cheer, didn't cry. The sound that left my throat was something quieter, an exhale that had been waiting months to be released. Daniel glanced at me, his eyes soft. "Justice doesn't heal," he murmured, "but it stops the bleeding." The bailiffs led my family away in handcuffs. My mother turned once eyes, searching for forgiveness that wasn't there. I met her gaze and said nothing. Outside, reporters clustered on the courthouse steps. "Ms. Ward." "How does it feel?" one shouted. I paused. "Like I can finally breathe," I said. The words felt strange, new, but true. That evening, I returned to my condo. The house was still, but not heavy anymore. I walked through each room, touching walls that had once witnessed fear. On the mantel sat the baseball bat, the same one Logan used. I'd kept it as evidence, but now it felt symbolic. I placed it inside a glass case I'd bought for that purpose and set it beneath the window where sunlight would catch it each morning. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was proof that survival had a sound, sometimes a scream, sometimes silence, sometimes just the faint echo of wood against bone, reminding you that you lived through it. Later that week, I went back to work. When I entered the office, colleagues stood and clapped quietly. "Gerald." My manager extended his hand. "Welcome back, Evelyn," he said. "You've earned this." A new title plaque waited on my desk, Senior Financial Analyst. The irony wasn't lost on me. Numbers had always been my safe place, and now they had saved me. The following month, the restitution arrived, partial payments from liquidated assets. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I transferred a portion into a new fund I called the Ward Justice Foundation. Its purpose to provide legal and financial support for victims of family-based fraud and domestic coercion. I announced it quietly online without fanfare. Within days, emails began arriving. Women, men, even seniors, people who'd been manipulated by the same kind of love my family used as a weapon. One message stood out. "Your story gave me courage to file my report." "Thank you." I read it twice and smiled. Late one night, months later, I stood again by the window overlooking Denver's skyline. The city pulsed with light and life. The same view I had stared at when everything was falling apart now reflected something else possibility. I touched the cool glass and whispered, "Family destroyed itself." Then I corrected myself softly. "No. They destroyed my cage." The stars blurred through tears I didn't wipe away. Somewhere, justice was being served in quiet rooms through court orders, restitution checks, and the slow machinery of accountability. But inside me, justice was a breath, a steady, defiant breath that said I was still here. A year later, when spring returned to Texas, I moved south to Dallas and started over. The air there felt wider somehow, the sunsets less judgmental. My condo was smaller, simpler, 2 rooms and a balcony that overlooked a small park where children played in the evenings. I chose it for the noise, for the proof of life. Silence no longer comforted me. It reminded me of the years when silence was all I had. I'd left Denver with a single suitcase and a box labeled Truth. Inside were copies of the evidence, the court judgment, and a photo of Grandma Ruth smiling in front of her old house before they sold it. Some nights I still touched the frame, tracing her wrinkled hands in the picture, remembering how she'd said, "Justice is slow, but it doesn't forget." She'd been right. Justice had found them, but it had also found me. The job I took wasn't glamorous, a part-time instructor at a community college teaching accounting to women re-entering the workforce after divorce or financial abuse. They reminded me of versions of myself. Polite, cautious, apologetic at first. By the 3rd week, they laughed more easily. By the 6th, they started using words like mine and deserve. Watching that transformation became my new measure of wealth. In my spare hours, I poured my energy into the Ward Justice Fund. What began as a small donation pool turned into a structured nonprofit. Daniel helped me design the protocols, insisting we keep it clean, transparent, protected. "No one should have to fight alone the way you did," he said. He still called sometimes, his voice steady as ever, though softer now. We never defined what we were to each other, ally friend, something more, but it didn't matter. He was the rare kind of person who didn't need to take from me to prove he cared. The media attention had faded, thankfully. Occasionally, someone would recognize my name and whisper, "Aren't you the woman whose family?" And I'd smile politely and change the subject. I didn't owe anyone that story anymore. It belonged to me. The only relic I kept visible was the baseball bat now sealed in a clear display case in my living room. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "Silence ends here." It wasn't vengeance, it was acknowledgement. A physical reminder that even the instruments of pain can become symbols of endurance when you survive long enough to own them. On weekends, I visited a small diner near the highway where the waitress Ruby knew my order by heart: black coffee eggs over medium wheat toast. She never asked questions about the scar above my temple, and I never offered stories she didn't request. We talked about weather community fairs, her grandkids, normal things that stitched ordinary life back together. Normal had become sacred. Sometimes late at night, I'd receive letters from Prison Brief, pleading notes written in familiar handwriting. My mother's were always the same. "We miss you. We're sorry. Families heal Evelyn." My father's were shorter. "We did what we thought was right." Logan wrote only once. "You won. I hope it was worth it." I never responded. Not out of hate, but because closure isn't conversation, it's distance. I'd already forgiven them in the quiet way forgiveness sometimes happens, not as absolution, but as release. They were part of my history, not my horizon. On the anniversary of the verdict, I held a small gathering for the first graduates of my financial independence class. They brought potluck dishes and stories of jobs they'd secured, accounts they'd opened in their own names, apartments they'd rented without co-signers. We toasted with cheap wine and laughter that filled the room until I almost forgot it was the same day my brother had once stood in handcuffs before a judge. After they left, I sat by the window looking out at the city lights. The park below was quiet now, the swing set swaying gently in the breeze. I thought about how light travels years through darkness before it reaches us. Maybe that was what healing really was. Light delayed, but not denied. I turned off the lamps, letting moonlight fill the room. The bat glimmered faintly in its case. "They taught me duty," I whispered, repeating the words I'd said in court. "I taught them consequence." And then softer, "And maybe that's enough." I poured tea, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop to draft a new article for the Foundation's website. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about the people who'd written to us: the nurse in Florida whose parents drained her savings, the retired teacher in Oregon whose son took out credit cards in her name, the veteran in Ohio defrauded by his own sibling. Their stories were different, but the wound was the same: betrayal wearing the mask of love. I wrote until the first light of dawn crept through the blinds. When I finished, I ended with a question that had once saved me. Have you ever faced family betrayal or violence hidden under the word love? Share your story. Someone needs your truth. It felt fitting. That was the power of testimony. It turned shame into signal pain, into permission for others to speak. The email notifications that followed were slow at first, then steady like a heartbeat returning after a long silence. Around 7 that morning, I walked to the park barefoot, the grass still damp with dew. Children's laughter drifted from the distance, dogs barked, life moved on. I tilted my face toward the sky, the sunlight warm against my scar. I was no longer the woman who'd cowered on a hospital bed, no longer the daughter begging for approval from people incapable of giving it. I was the author of my own ledger, now balancing the columns of loss and resilience until they came out even. The city hummed awake around me, full of small sounds that no longer frightened me: doors closing, engines starting, people beginning again. I smiled, not for what I'd survived, but for what I'd reclaimed: the right to exist without apology. And when I returned home, I touched the plaque beneath the bat once more. The metal was cool under my fingers. "You can't erase blood," I whispered, "but you can choose what story it tells." Then I turned away from the case, opened the windows wide, and let the light flood in. If you're still here, still listening, still breathing through the silence that followed Evelyn's story, then maybe something inside you recognized a piece of it. Maybe you've sat in a quiet kitchen after the people who were supposed to love you most broke something that can never be repaired. Maybe you've stared at the ceiling wondering when love turned into leverage, when family started to feel like a battlefield. Stories like this aren't just about crime, they're about truth, the kind that hides in plain sight. For so many of us, family taught us early how to keep the peace, how to stay small to keep others comfortable, how to carry guilt that was never ours to hold. We learned to call it loyalty when what it really was fear. Evelyn's story isn't just about justice, it's about the long road between silence and voice, between duty and freedom. And if you've ever walked that road, you know it's not straight. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It shows up in moments in the first night. You sleep without checking the door, in the first laugh that doesn't feel like betrayal, in the first breath that doesn't carry their shadow. Maybe tonight is that moment for you. If you've lived through something like this, financial control, emotional manipulation, family violence disguised as care, know this: you are not alone. Thousands of people who watch these stories come from every corner of America. Some write from Oklahoma farmhouses, some from small apartments in Florida, some from quiet lakeside homes in Oregon. They all have one thing in common: they've been told to stay quiet. But here we speak. Here silence ends. If you're ready, I want you to write in the comments, not for me, but for you. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us the time, the city, the place where your truth is finally being heard. Or just write one line: "I'm still here." Because sometimes surviving is the loudest story of all. Maybe your family used guilt to keep you close. Maybe they drained your savings, took your name, or broke your spirit. Maybe they smiled while they did it. And maybe you've been waiting for someone to say that you're not crazy for walking away. Consider this that moment. Walking away isn't betrayal, it's self-respect. Speaking up isn't revenge, it's reclamation. Healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering without being owned by the memory. And justice, real justice, isn't about punishment, it's about peace. If you believe that, let me know below. Drop a heart emoji or share one sentence about the day you decided enough was enough. Your words might reach someone scrolling through tonight, someone who's still hiding, still doubting, still afraid. You might be the reason they choose to stand up tomorrow. And if you haven't yet found your strength, borrow Evelyn's for a little while. Borrow her silence turned into evidence, her fear turned into light. Because every story like hers adds another brick to the bridge that carries us out of darkness. Maybe that's why we tell these stories, not to reopen wounds, but to remind each other that scars can guide the way home. So if this story meant something to you, let it live on. Share it with someone who needs to hear that family can fail you and you can still rise. Subscribe if you want more stories about truth, justice, and the quiet courage it takes to start over. Every week, we share real voices from people who chose strength instead of silence. Maybe next time it'll be your story that gives someone else the strength to speak. Thank you for watching, for listening, for breathing through this story with us. Wherever you are right now, in a living room, a parked car, or a kitchen full of memories, take one deep breath. You made it here, and that matters more than you know. Truth takes time, but it always arrives. Now it's your turn. Where are you watching from tonight?